Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Nittany Lions Sports Report. Bob Long, Tyler Gelhaus in our brand new Bluebell Studios and getting ready for a brand new Penn State football season, one with lots of promise for a team that was oh so close last year to making the run all the way to the college football playoff. 2 losses by a combined 4 points, both of which they had leads in the fourth quarter. And Ohio State, of course, that 2-touchdown lead. We have a lot to get to tonight, and we're going to talk about this team this year, why this team can be different, some of the key losses from last year, and of course, how they're going to move forward this year. Tyler, I think, one, we're going to have a tremendous resource on tonight. Brian Tripp from BTN and from Between the Lions. He does work with Penn State baseball and Penn State hockey as the voice of their teams, but plugged in on the Penn State circuit, and I think he's going to have a lot to discuss. We're going to have a lot to discuss because this team is just so interesting. Maybe as much as any Penn State team in the last decade, there's intrigue about who's going to be plugged in where. Are the freshmen going to contribute? We're going to go through the depth chart for you, which was just released today, and have lots of discussions about what could be a very promising season for Penn State.
First and foremost, Bob, happy to be back for another year here on Bob Long Sports. Last year was a blast. Obviously, great season, 11-2. A lot of people thought it should have been better. College football playoff. Is this a year for Penn State? We'll find out. And you bring up a good point about the intrigue in this year's team, and I think a lot of it is the fact that we're now beginning to see these top recruiting classes come into play where they've been, redshirting and haven't really been key players in the last couple of years because they've had guys like Saquon Barkley, Mike Gesicki, Deshaun Hamilton on the offensive side of the ball, just to name a few. And now there's been guys waiting in the wings that are finally going to get their shot. And there is a lot of uncertainty, but the one thing that is for sure is the talent is there.
Yeah, I think so, without a doubt. I mean, Miles Sanders comes in as one of the top touted recruits in the country, really the top running back in the country that year. Now they bring in a true freshman in Ricky Slade, who I think is going to see some time this year at the running back position. Of course, you talk about Mark Allen, Journey Brown, guys that haven't found their way into key contributing roles. Then again, Saquon Barkley will do that to you. But I think the combination of Miles Sanders, who I think we do need to remember has had trouble holding on to the football at times, improved a little bit on that as the season went on last year, and by all accounts has had a really good spring and summer, is going to be ready to be leaned upon. And I think, and we'll talk about this with Brian certainly, that another big thing is the offensive line. This is the most continuity that Penn State has had from an offensive line perspective. Connor McGovern, certainly coming back, and he had a tremendous year last year. Ryan Bates, while he was in, he fought some injuries, certainly, and the biggest of all coming in that Ohio State football game with him, and certainly Buckholes on the defensive line. Perhaps they win that game. Probably they win that game. You have him protecting the left side. And then Will Fries, as well as Chaz Wright. Fries, I thought, did a great job in the second part of the season when there were those injuries on the offensive line. There's some more continuity. Michael Mennett at center, first real look at him on a consistent basis. I think this offensive line, all told, can be, I don't know if the strength of the team, but certainly not a liability like it was last year.
Right. It's been a liability the last couple of years, obviously, because of the NCAA sanctions, and let's be frank, it wasn't the best recruited position from the end of Paterno era and Bill O'Brien as well. But Franklin and Coach Limegrover have done a great job developing, running through the offensive line. I mean, these guys, they're big guys. Left tackle Bates is 6'4", 302. Gonzalez, left guard, 6'4", 325. Manette at center, 6'4", 298. Right guard McGovern is 6'5", 323. And if Chaz Wright's a starter at right tackle, he's 6'7", 353. So, I mean, this is one of the biggest lines that they have had at Penn State as well, and also one of the most athletic. And I think, you talk about breaking in a new running back in Sanders. I mean, he should have a lot of room to run, so he'll be able to showcase his stuff.
More so than certainly Saquon, who had all the tools
exactly,
in the world.
And he didn't have a line, and he still made it work somehow, which was even more impressive.
It certainly was. Once again, this is the Nittany Lions Sports Report. It's live here on BLS. Bob Long, Tyler Gelhaus, soon to be joined by BTN correspondent Brian Tripp, as well as the host of Between the Lions, a weekly podcast. And actually, they're coming out with stuff more often than weekly as they prepare for the season. These guys are on top of it, Matt Bortner, Jason Lord. So give them a follow, certainly on Twitter, and give them a shout on iTunes. You can download all their podcasts. But we're excited to have him on. He'll have a lot to discuss. And then in the second half of the show, we're going to bring you to the whiteboard. And the whiteboard sits right behind me here, just off camera. And excited to bring to you our initial blitz, the blitz here on the BLS talk show and the Nittany Lions Sports Report. We're going to bring you that depth chart and kind of the keys as we work through who's in that starting 11, who's in that starting defensive 11, and then who could possibly jump into the equation as the season goes on. One thing, Tyler, that I think we want to talk about, however, is the key losses, and I think one loss that could be key, at least in terms of for a short period of time, is actually one not on the field, and that is the loss of Joe Moorhead off to Mississippi State. Of course, that has been for quite some time. Ricky Ronnie got the job heading into the Washington game. I thought coached a pretty good game, but again, now a full 12-game slate in front of Ronnie. He's a young, up-and-coming type guy using the principles under Joe Moorhead and putting his own spin on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely going to be a big loss. Obviously, when Moorhead came in to Penn State, they were struggling after they fired John Donovan, and the offense was horrible. I mean, jet sweeps and a lot of really bad calls, formations. The athletes weren't getting the ball. Moorhead obviously is very responsible for turning it around, like Penn State did. However, I'm very confident with Ronnie because he was there under Moorhead. He's a smart guy. He's a Cornell grad. He played quarterback at Cornell. And he obviously you can call it a dress rehearsal against Washington and Fiesta Bowl. That was a great showing, and I think you're going to see a lot of the same things that Moorhead did at Penn State, and he might even do some things better than Moorhead. But nevertheless, there's going to still be a learning curve there for Ronnie.
We talk Penn State, of course, all the time here on the Nittany Lions Sports Report, but so much going on in the national landscape as well. We'll talk about our picks for the not the NCAA. Goodness, whew. There's a slip, but the college football playoff and teams that I think a couple of our teams that we picked might be right down Broadway, a couple others that might shock you, and we'll talk about why as the show goes on. And as we talk about this Penn State team, though, clearly in the Big Ten East, the toughest division in college football, I'll say that without blinking here, the Big Ten East with Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Penn State, I would say clearly the best conference, the best division in the best conference in college football, although those SEC folks point to Alabama against Georgia in the national championship, end of discussion, period, stop. But you have four teams in the preseason. Granted, preseason rankings don't always matter, but right in the preseason top 15.
And then you also have Wisconsin out west.
Yes, you do.
And they're actually the top-ranked team, which I don't agree with. They're at number 4 right now.
Right.
Which I don't agree with, but they're in the Big Ten.
They're in the Big Ten, and if they win out, they deserve it. Now,
yes, they do.
If anybody wins out, they're going to deserve it. But Penn State's schedule this year, very, very interesting because we look at Penn State, and they will take on Appalachian State to begin the year. That'll be this weekend up at Happy Valley, and then they'll take on the Pitt Panthers on the road at Heinz Field, a second time in 3 years that they'll be there, and then one more time back at Beaver Stadium the following year. But you look in the middle of that schedule, Saturday, September 29th, a home game against Ohio State, a bye week, which I think might help, and then at home against Michigan State, at Michigan on November the 3rd, hosting Wisconsin the very next weekend. So, some very, very difficult games there. A lot to get to in this schedule, and to do so, we're going to bring on Brian Tripp. Brian Tripp is with BTN, and we're excited to have him on. He's been a great resource for us in the past and has been very, very generous with his time. We appreciate him coming on. And Brian, welcome back to another Nittany Lions Sports Report. We're excited to talk some football once again.
Thanks a lot, Bob. Really appreciate you having me on. If you hear some noise in the background, it's 85 and sunny in Happy Valley. Sun is setting just right now over the mountain, so checking out a little soccer game this evening.
Oh, wonderful. Over there at Jeffrey Field, huh?
Yeah, pitch looks pretty good.
That's good. Well, we'll talk about the other pitch, and that's the pitch just across the way at Beaver Stadium, which will host the first game of the regular season against Appalachian State. I guess we got to get this question out of the way. World beaters back in the mid 2000s beat Michigan. Of course, many permutations to that program since then. Moved up from FCS to the FBS. Really, they've had a decent showing since their time in the FBS. The only non-conference opponent with receiving votes in the top 25 for Penn State. What do you see, or what do you know about this Appalachian State team that folks that are kind of dusting off the tailgate equipment and heading up to State College might expect this weekend?
Well, if you didn't know much about them prior to James Franklin press conference today, you probably know a lot about them now. I think he spent about 8 minutes talking about the opponent just to make sure his team, and I think the media doesn't overlook them. It's a team that's 30-9 over the last 3 seasons, has won 3 straight bowl games. And you look across the board, they're replacing a 4-year starter at quarterback, but they have a lot of playmakers on offense, a 2-time all-conference running back. They have some experience back along the offensive line. They do have speed on the outside, which is the great equalizer, which James Franklin talked about today. And then defensively, they have some all-conference returnees as well. So I think this is a really good first game for Penn State where, look, Penn State has a lot more talent, has a lot more experience, and should win the football game. But it's a team that at least is going to challenge Penn State in some ways than maybe an opponent that really struggled in the MAC last year per se. This is a team that's had success in its conference, success in a bowl game. And I think it's a really good first game for Penn State. Not going to be a pushover, but a game ultimately you think Penn State should win.
And a game in which Penn State will have the opportunity and really the necessity to work in some guys that either weren't on the roster, weren't in a starting role last year. And I'll take you specifically to the defensive line because clearly we've seen a lot of changes, 2 retirements due to injury. I think we thought for a while the defensive end position might be the one with the most depth. Now there's questions about Shane Simmons as well, with Torrance Brown retiring and Ryan Buchholz retiring. What do you see at the front 4 position this year, and how will Penn State adjust to some of the departures that I mentioned?
Yeah, I think a defensive line right now that's a little bit in flux, but has a lot of talent that is in the stable. Look, I don't think it's any surprise to the coaching staff that Ryan Buchholz or Torrance Brown ended up retiring. It sounds like around the program they knew that was going to happen for a long time. But you're already replacing your starters at defensive tackle from a year ago, Cothran and Cothran. So you knew it was going to be a new look, but they've recruited really well at that position. PJ Mustafer, I can't wait to see on the field. And we'll finally get a look at Shelton. We'll get a look at Hansard. We'll get a look at Windsor in some more extended action. And I think the defensive end position still, even without Torrance Brown and Ryan Buchholz, could be a strength of the team. Sharif Miller has the potential to be one of the best defensive linemen. They should ban vuvuzelas from soccer, but Sharif Miller has the potential to be one of the best defensive linemen in the entire Big Ten. I think Yetur Gross-Matos proved last year that not only is he came in as a freshman and performed well last year and counted on some big games, but not only does he have a bright future here at Penn State, but probably has a professional future in front of him. And then when you get to the likes of Shane Simmons as a pass rusher who wasn't on the depth chart this week, it sounds like he's battling some injury. Shaka Toney, and then some of the incoming guys, I think I know Joseph is on there. Coaching staff likes him in limited action, that they've seen him in the past. I think it's a chance now for guys to really prove. And if there's one position where, going into the year, you may have questions, but if a track record for Sean Spencer is proven anything, you probably don't need to have questions. It's that defensive line group at Penn State, especially the defensive ends.
Hey, Brian, this is Tyler Gelhaus. Quick question, sticking on the defensive side of the ball. I'm going to move back to linebackers. Obviously, Manny Bowen was reinstated in early August. We learned yesterday that he is no longer with the program. How does this affect the linebacking corp going into the season and actually throughout the whole season, specifically with Jan Johnson starting in the middle?
Yeah, I think you'll see a lot of different linebackers play for Penn State. I'm not sure just necessarily because they were listed the starters in week 1. That's what the starters will be in week 4 or week 5. But I think it's the guys right now that give them the best chance to win in week 1. Jan Johnson is an experienced middle linebacker. He runs okay, but he knows where to be. His instincts are pretty good. He's a really good athlete, obviously. He wrestled for Penn State for a little bit. So they're counting on him because he knows where to go. He knows what to do. And then Koa Farmer proved last year that I think he's continuing his transition to linebacker. Now is comfortable at that position. And Cam Brown's a guy that could have a breakout year. For Cam, it hasn't been a question about his physical attributes. It's been more for Cam about, does he understand the defense? He can certainly run in coverage. Will he be in the right spot? So I think the linebacker position, I'm not sure they ever really were counting on Manny Bowen. I think it would have been a nice addition, a nice surprise if they had him. But talking at media day, it just sounded like Manny had to earn the trust back of his teammates and his coaches, and ultimately the program parting ways with Manny. And Manny, I guess today, one of the players said in a conference call that he was focusing on his academics now. I'm not sure they really were planning on having him in the fold anyway. So I'm not sure that they view that, again, as a huge loss. And we didn't even talk about Ellis Brooks, who's a really talented young player, Jesse Luketa, who I think is going to play by the time the year's out, and then Micah Parsons, who's going to play. It's just, can he be consistent enough to be a starter? And I think the first couple of weeks could prove very valuable to Micah, where he can gain that on-field experience and perhaps become a guy Penn State can count on in 3 downs and not just in certain packages.
Well, there's a guy that I think a lot of folks at Penn State are looking forward to seeing, and on the offensive side of the ball, that's a young guy named Justin Shorter. And I also think that between him and Jahan Dotson, you might have 2 guys that can play, and I don't know if that time, is week 1 per se, most likely not for Shorter, as we found out, but whether that time to play will exceed the 4-game threshold before you need to burn a red shirt, and whether those guys will be 3rd and 4th options from a wide receiver perspective this year.
Yeah, that certainly does throw a little bit of a wrinkle into that 4-game thing. And James Franklin, I asked him about that today specifically. He said, well, the guys who are green lighted are going to be green lighted very much the same as before, and everything same as before. The guys who are kind of given that yellow designation, they'll be the guys that maybe they keep an eye on with that 4-game threshold. And then the guys who are truly red lighted or red shirted, they're still going to be red shirted. That it doesn't really change a whole lot for them. The only thing about the wide receiver position and Justin Shorter, I think it's kind of been explained here that he's nicked up. There's so much depth and talent there already without, look, if a freshman's that good and earns playing time, they're going to find a way on the field. But between Jawan Johnson, DeAndre Tompkins, Brandon Polk, KJ Hamler, and Matt Hippenhammer, okay, there you already have 5 guys. And then I know people are talking highly about Cam Sullivan-Brown. That being said, there's a reason Justin Shorter was one of the top recruits in the country, and if he gets healthy and they feel comfortable about putting him in that offense, or even Jahan Dotson, who's had a terrific fall for Penn State. Dotson, I actually saw him play a high school game last year. He just needs to get bigger. He's smooth. He can really run once he gets the football. They're going to find a way to get him the ball. But he's a guy that I think 2-3 years from now, you look at, he could be a star at this level. He just needs to get a little bigger yet. But if he's good enough, they'll find a way to get him some touches.
It seems like this is one of the first years in a while, we haven't had a lot of question marks on the offensive line, which is a great thing. However, there is a lot of question marks replacing Gesicki at tight end, and in the depth chart released today by James Franklin, it has Holland or Dalton, and then backed up by Bowers and the true freshman Freiermuth. How do you see that shaking out throughout the season?
Well, I think it speaks volumes about Freiermuth that James Franklin said he's going to be one of the guys that's green lighted from the get-go. So that means they think pretty highly of him. Overall, the tight end position, I don't know that you can replace the pass catching ability and touchdowns and whatever Gesicki brought to you as a playmaker. I don't know you can replace that, but I think and look, this is not a knock on Mike Gesicki. I think he's going to be a terrific NFL player, but you can't get much worse blocking at that position. So I think if Jonathan Holland or Danny Dalton or Nick Bowers, whoever it may be, can prove to be a very competent blocker, they'll rotate that position. So if there's a pass catching situation, maybe that dictates who plays. And I think by getting a better blocker in at tight end, which I think they'll have this year, will help them balance out the offense a little bit more. I think it's going to be a very balanced offense, kind of like you saw in the Fiesta Bowl, where touches will go to whoever. Trace McSorley is a senior quarterback who's going to spread the ball around. I think it's going to give the offense, it's going to have a different dynamic, a different feel to it, but I think it's going to be as explosive as ever.
Brian Tripp on with us here from Big Ten Network, as well as the Between the Lions podcast. He's also the voice of the Penn State hockey team, the Penn State baseball team. Excited to have him on, and not calling the game, but over at Jeffrey Field tonight, giving us a little report on soccer as well. We appreciate you certainly taking the time here this evening, and we want to get you out here on a couple items. We want to get your opinion on, I guess, whatever bold prediction you'd like to make, whether that's Trace McSorley winning the Heisman, whether that's the college football playoff for Penn State, some of both, or none of any of that. What do you think can happen, will happen on the Penn State side that either folks are really hopeful about or people might not see coming?
Oh man, that's a tough question.
It's very broad. I apologize. Yes,
it is. Is it bold to say that Miles Sanders will have more rushing yards than Saquon did last year? Is that a bold prediction?
I like it.
It is bold, and I like it too. And I actually do agree with Brian on that.
Yeah, I think that's plenty bold.
Yeah, I just think that it goes back to them and the diversity that the offense has. I think Miles is going to have some room to run, and they're going to give him the ability to do that and showcase his talents. That's not that Miles Sanders. Look, I'm not saying Miles Sanders is better than Saquon Barkley. Saquon's a once-in-a-generation talent, but just the way the carries are going to be distributed, and teams won't be so focused on one single guy. You're not going to have 9-10 guys in a box this year. I think it's going to give Miles at least the freedom where he can maybe gain 5 or 6 yards at a time. Saquon, it felt like sometimes last year, just because of the blocking scheme in front of him, and defenses keying on him so much. Last year, Saquon was a little bit more boom and bust than I think Penn State would have liked.
Fair enough. And then if you could, let our folks know, because you do such good work around the program with your podcast, with BTN, and all the different mediums through which you transmit your message, what you're going to be up to this fall and how people can follow you.
Yeah, so the first couple of weeks of the season, I'll be doing post-game interviews with Coach Franklin after the game on gopsusports.com and on Tuesdays. So today we did kind of a game preview with Coach. We walked around the Lash Field and talked to Will Fries, who's listed as an or at tackle, and Amani Oruwariye, the cornerback. So those video previews will be coming up during the week. And then when I'm needed, we're doing pregame and postgame reports for Big Ten Network. And as always, I'll maybe have a nugget or two on my Twitter account as well. So I guess you read a long resume. If it's a Penn State sporting event, I'll probably be there in some capacity, for better or worse.
That's great, man. Well, we appreciate you taking some time, literally out of your time at the soccer match, to give us some insight. We appreciate it as always, and hopefully we'll catch you midway through the season here, maybe an undefeated record or something going into Michigan State on the 13th.
I would not be stunned. Would not be stunned, and don't worry about distracting me from a soccer game. I enjoy coming to watch Penn State, and it looks like Coach Cook's going to do a great job with the program. But sometimes soccer I find less than enthralling after watching the puck fly around the ice all winter.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, we will talk to you soon, my friend.
All right, Bob. Have a good one.
All right, you too. There you
See
go.
you guys.
That is Brian Tripp. Certainly appreciate him coming on here tonight. Always a great resource. And, we'll segue there. I mentioned the 13th against Michigan State for a reason. One, would be a great time to get him on about a month and a half from now. Two, that's 4 games heading into the bye, and that last game before the bye, of course, being Ohio State at home. A topic we did not broach thus far in the show or with Brian Tripp. So I'll first get your thoughts on Brian Tripp, anything he said that surprised you, and then we can talk a little bit about the first 4 games here.
I guess it's kind of soothing to hear that they weren't really relying on Manny Bowen too much anyway. He got kicked off the team last year, a little bit more than halfway through. He was also sent home from the Rose Bowl the year before. So there's obviously some issues there. And then Penn State James Franklin set some guidelines for him to, achieve in order to come back in for fall camp.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently he did them, and then just yesterday he announced that he's no longer with the team. Although I did hear that he was not kicked off. He just it sounds like gave at least football up at Penn State, which I think kind of reflects on what Brian Tripp was saying, that the depth chart they would have found out about the depth chart the day before Monday, the team, before it was released to the media and the fans. So I think that they probably had a talk with him, and he probably really wasn't going to see much of the field, definitely early in the season, maybe throughout. I mean, that's not for me to speculate, but I'm thinking that's probably he probably wasn't getting a lot of reps, and that's kind of soothing to me, knowing that the linebackers have worked a lot together, and they seem very confident with the linebacking core that they have.
Yeah, he mentioned one guy as well. We talked about the young guys with Jesse Luketa and talking about Ellis Brooks potentially making their way into the lineup down the road. P.J. Mustafer is a guy coming out of McDonough. I had the opportunity to broadcast his game last year as LaSalle High School went down to play McDonough. For those of you that follow BLS, I do all the LaSalle High School football games. An opportunity to go down to Baltimore and see a 4-star Under Armour game recruit, P.J. Mustafer, who had already committed to Penn State, was something I couldn't pass up. And my goodness, was he a tremendous athlete. Already built at 300 pounds as a senior in high school, comes into the strength program here at Penn State, comes in early and he's had a really good summer. I think really exciting to see what he can do. He's one of those green light guys that Brian was talking about. And I think with Kevin Givens, Robert Windsor, we talked about Hansert, and PJ, I think, can find his way into that mix. I think that's a good thing for Penn State and Penn State fans because he's a guy that can contribute for 4 years, I guess, if Penn State's lucky. If the development he's showing.
Or if he doesn't leave after 3 years, right.
Exactly.
Yeah, he is one of the players. I mean, he could be a first-round pick in a couple years. Yeah. I mean, he's that good. He's 6'4", 300 pounds, 18, 19 years old.
Yep.
Also I believe he's a state champion wrestler. So he's a freak athlete. His brother is actually the starting center for Notre Dame.
Right. That's right.
Sam. So he's obviously got they've got great athletic genes in the family. And all season, Penn State's been talking about how they're going to replace defensive tackle, losing Cothran. And you plug Givens and Windsor in, who have played a lot of football for Penn State. And then people see the depth behind them. Oh, well, we don't really know about this guy, that guy. They're all very highly rated recruits, and they're ready. They're ready to go. They're inexperienced, but the talent is there.
Right.
So I mean, it's something that they're gonna. It could end up being a strength at the end of the year, the defensive tackle, because they do have the talent there. It's just about cohesion and getting experience under their belts.
Yeah. We talk at length about how good that line was last year with the depth, all the changes, and I think getting cohesion clearly is important because you had both Cothrans in there last year, as Brian Tripp mentioned. Torrance Brown went down. Ryan Buchholz kind of took over. Then he gets hurt. So for as good as that line was, there wasn't that cohesion that you're talking about. And I think this year that's going to be important because you have a front seven that is almost entirely new. I mean, almost entirely new.
Yeah, it is, but it's funny because the skill set and the athletic ability is there.
Right.
But it is new, but the DNs are all a year older.
Yep.
And that should be a huge strength, especially when you look at somebody like Yetur Gross-Matos. He could have, even if Buchholz was healthy, he could have overtaken a starting spot there.
That's true.
He really could have.
And the other thing is you have a big body like that can certainly rush and get to the quarterback, but more importantly, can protect the outside against read options, etc. The size with the athleticism. The other thing is a guy that Brian Tripp mentioned, and we hadn't really heard a ton about, but we know his talent, and that's the guy who's the Big Ten newcomer of the year twice, something like that. Shaka Toney, who the issue there was the snap count after Ryan Buchholz got hurt in the last 3-4 games of the season. The opportunity now to be the number 2 at that position with Shane Simmons if he's healthy over the next couple of weeks, to give Shaka Toney back that role where he was so successful last year, which is a third down, edge rusher, give him less snaps than, say, Sharif Miller, who can go most of the game. Sharif Miller last year obviously played an unconscionable amount of snaps and stayed fresh. Shaka Toney, a little bit younger, different body type, can't quite do that.
Yep.
I think it's imperative that they keep him in that type of role as he continues to develop physically and allow him to succeed in that role. And I think Yetur Gross-Matos is going to allow him to do that.
Yeah, and when you think of Shaka Toney, I'd say Aaron Maben type player. speed rusher, third and long.
Does that mean you think he's going to have one of those years where he just takes off? Like maybe.
I mean, I hope so, but I hope he doesn't make the bad decision of going to the pros early, and that didn't work out. But that's a whole other subject.
But when we come to it,
I mean, if we can get that kind of production, that'd be great.
From just
but
about anyone.
Yeah,
it's a lot to digest. It's a lot of good stuff going on here for the Penn State Nittany Lions this year. We're going to take a quick break and come back on the other side, what should be a really fun segment, and that's going to be called The Blitz. The Blitz, where we're going to have the whiteboard just to my right here, and we'll go through X's and O's over the course of the year. Today, we're just going to walk you through the full depth chart put up on the football field so that everybody can see, hey, what are we going to be looking at? What side is John Reed going to play on? Where are you going to have Sam versus Will linebacker? Who are those guys going to be? And who could come up and take those guys' spots maybe perhaps during the middle of the year? And where could those snaps be split? I think it'll be a fun segment. We'll start with that tonight. We'll come back on the other side here on the Nittany Lions Sports Report.
www.dumpyford.com.
Come experience the Dumpy difference. You'll be glad you did.
What does your character look like? Does it bounce back after each setback? Does it stand out by standing up? Does it make good on good intentions? Character is invisible until it's not. Only through action will the world know what it's made of, what you're made of. Find out how you can strengthen the character of your community alongside empowered veterans and families of the fallen at travismanion.org.
I would say that LaSalle is dynamic. Prepared. Active. Diverse. Brotherhood. Family.
Ford is Mayfair's neighborhood Ford store.
Nobody knows your neighborhood like Dunphy Ford.
Nearly 40 years.
Right here on Frankfurt Avenue.
Generation after generation. Our neighbors continue to be our customers. We have access to the cars and trucks you want with financing you need.
Dunphy Ford is Northeast Philly's first choice for America's #1 brand. 7700 Frankfurt Avenue in Mayfair. Online at www.dumpyford.com.
Come experience the Dumpy difference. You'll be glad you did.
What does your character look like? Does it bounce back after each setback? Does it stand out by standing up? Does it make good on good intentions? Character is invisible until it's not. Only through action will the world know what it's made of, what you're made of. Find out how you can strengthen the character of your community alongside empowered veterans and families of the fallen at travismanion.org.
All right, everybody, welcome back here. This is the Nittany Lions Sports Report. Bob Long, Tyler Galehouse, and we're going to now work our way into our newest segment, and that is the Blitz. The Blitz, where we bring you a concept of the Penn State, whether it's offense, defense, going into each particular week. And tonight, we're just going to give you the depth chart because we all saw it for the first time today, and I know everybody's very excited about that. So let's start on the offense. Got the offensive line here. This is we'll call it our brand new board where we're working through all this. So I think the offensive line is very, very interesting because I think this right here was the big unknown. Will Fries, Chaz Wright, both guys that had pretty good years last year. Will Fries came in kind of in the later part of the season after Ryan Bates got hurt. I thought did a very good job. First game, really struggled after that Ohio State game. That was obviously the loss to Michigan State. I thought he showed his ability to be very physical as the season went on, and I think now is going to beat out Chaz Wright over the course of the year for this job. Right guard, Connor McGovern, just absolutely tried, true, consistent, the guy you want up front. Michael Menet, a guy that we knew for years was going to come up and be a strong player. He's going to take over at center. Steven Gonzalez, I'll say this. I think he's a guy that has struggled at times, certainly in the beginning portions of last year, but he's gotten bigger and stronger as well. And it's a common theme as we look at these guys. Every one of these guys has struggled at one point in time in their career. Maybe the only exception to that would be Ryan Bates, because Ryan Bates, I think we knew for a long time coming in that he could be a guy that can play just about anywhere and play at a very high level. You know, from left to right, back to left. He's played a lot of positions on the offensive line. They thought about moving him into guard, etc. He's actually the key to this offense, I think, because he's protecting Trace McSorley's blind spot, and because I think from a run protection perspective, he can do both pass and run protect as well as anybody on this offensive line. On the wide receiver side, KJ Hamler up at the top, a guy that we knew, again, for a few years was going to be a guy that could contribute in his sophomore, junior year. Here he is now coming in on the outside opposite Jawan Johnson, who only had one touchdown last year. I think that's kind of a fun fact. Of course, that one touchdown was quite an entertaining and quite an important one on the road at Iowa to win that game. He's a guy that perhaps could see his last season in Happy Valley this year. If he does as well as people are expecting him to, could bolt for the NFL draft, and I wouldn't blame him with that body type. The tight end position, Jonathan Holland. Jonathan Holland is a guy replacing Mike Gesicki. He's a better blocker. Brian Tripp talked about that in our last segment. And I think with this type of receiving core, with Matt Kippenhammer waiting in the wings, freshman Justin Shorter, and Jahan Dotson, that might be what you need from John Holland, right? Because you have Miles Sanders, and behind him, you have some tremendous running backs. But I think what you're going to see is Ricky Slade get some significant time and be able to go out onto the outside, catch passes out of the backfield, and, of course, also run the ball when needed as kind of a change-up back from Miles Sanders. I think this offense is in a tremendous spot. The fact that you're talking about DeAndre Tompkins as your slot receiver, as your, I don't know if you'd call him your third option, but kind of that third wide receiver in there, I think puts Penn State in a tremendous spot. And this guy right here, Trace McSorley, can have that type of year where now he's the focus, of course, for these defenses more so than when that Sanders was replaced by Saquon Barkley. But I think that he has the receivers. He's going to have better protection where he can have a Heisman Trophy caliber year. On the defensive side of the game, Nick Scott, Garrett Taylor. These are guys that last year did not see time. Nick Scott a little bit early on, but Troy Apke, he came in and won that job, and deservedly so. But now, Scott, I think, is going to have an opportunity to really really prove himself, and it's these guys right here, Amani Oruwariye and then John Reed coming back from injury, that is going to allow him to be successful, going to allow him to take more chances, going to allow him to creep up towards the line and stack the box against some of these running teams that you're seeing in the Big Ten. I think guys like Taylor and Scott can be huge against Ohio State if you have John Reed one-on-one against some of those talented receivers, take them off the board, and then make Dwayne Haskins beat you over and through the air. So I think safety is going to be a huge spot, kind of a question mark, but I think a huge spot for this defense this year. Up front, we talked about it a lot before the break, so we won't go into significant detail. But again, besides Sharif Miller here, Robert Windsor, Kevin Givens, and Yetur Gross-Matos, guys that are newer to the role. But again, I think the more time you spend in this program, in the weight room, I mean, Gross-Matos is a man. I mean, he's a younger guy, but he is absolutely in a man's body, big, strong, tough, run stopping, as well as getting to the quarterback. And as I mentioned before, I think that allows Shaka Toney to be very, very successful in a backup role coming off the edge there. And then at linebacker, Cam Brown, Jan Johnson, a guy that is going to be really solid. You know, you take a look at some of the great Penn State middle linebackers. Jan Johnson reminds you a lot more of that than perhaps a guy like Micah Parsons that we thought maybe could start at the Mike day one. Of course, that's not going to happen. He's coming in the second string behind Koa, behind Cam. They'll find a spot for him certainly to take his snaps. The other guys that I think we can talk about a lot more are the guys behind Jan Johnson. He can get things started. He can be the leader, the veteran that can be that influence on Ellis Brooks as well as Jesse Luketa. And I think both of those guys are going to be role players for Penn State. We mentioned the 4-game rule where guys can now play for 4 games before actually being redshirted. I think that's going to be an entirely new wrinkle within what Penn State is going to do, and it could not come at a better time because there has been no time in Penn State's history that they have had this many freshmen ready to compete on this level, ready to get onto the field on day one. So that's a walk through the depth chart for Penn State, and the Nittany Lions. They have a lot to look forward to this year. And I think these guys here, and some guys not on that board, are going to be huge in terms of Penn State's ability to compete and perhaps chase that undefeated record this year through the regular season. So we'll take a break and come back on the other side. You are watching the Nittany Lions Sports Report here on BLS.
I would say that LaSalle is dynamic. Prepared. Active. Diverse. Relevant. Family.
Ford is Mayfair's neighborhood Ford store.
Nobody knows your neighborhood like Dunphy Ford.
Nearly 40 years.
Right here on Frankfurt Avenue.
Generation after generation, our neighbors continue to be our customers. We have access to the cars and trucks you want with financing you need.
Dunphy Ford is Northeast Philly's first choice for America's #1 brand. 7700 Frankfurt Avenue in Mayfair. Online at www.dumpyford.com.
Come experience the Dumpy difference. You'll be glad you did.
Welcome back, everybody. Nittany Lions Sports Report here on BLS. Bob Long. We have Tyler Gelhaus as well. Very excited to be with you here this evening. And I understand that through the Blitz, you thought I did an okay job, but I might have missed something.
For the most part, Bob, you did a great job with the Blitz. However, we forgot one very important position on the depth chart, and that is the Lion. Who the starter is Tommy Stevens, and who the backup is Tommy Stevens. There was only one Lion, and that is Tommy Stevens.
That is Tommy Stevens.
It'll be interesting to see how they use him this year, though. Hopefully he's getting a lot of reps at quarterback. He also is in a walking boot right now as well.
Right.
But he was also in the spring for a little bit. I think it's a little precautionary thing, but when he's on the field, it's good to see him in at quarterback when they have big leads. And God forbid McSorley gets hurt. We know we have good quarterback behind him. But the Lion is an interesting position where they moved him around last year. He had a couple rushing touchdowns. He caught a touchdown at Northwestern. And he's built like a tight end. So it'll be interesting to see if he gets more catches, more throwing opportunities. You never know. But a true testament to him for sticking with the program. He was exploring grad transfer options this past offseason, and ultimately decided that, you know what, this is where I want to be. I'll have my chance next year. And you never know. He could have his chance this year. You never know. But
you hope not.
No, you hope not. But it's great that that they have a position for him, and he's athletic enough that they can put him into the Lions.
It really is something else. I don't know. I don't know what we're actually going to see this year in terms of the Lion formation. I like to think that they're going to park him on the bench and have him ready in case something happens. Again, we're not talking necessarily Trace McSorley being out for the season either. We're talking about Trace, bangs his finger against somebody's helmet and needs to kind of take a couple series off, or just kind of takes a shot, gets the wind knocked out of him, and you're in the third quarter against Ohio State. God forbid.
And for the last 2 years, Trace McSorley has been healthy.
Right.
So.
Right. But the point being is, if you have the best or one of the best backup quarterbacks in the country, that is not a bad thing.
That is a great thing.
We'll take a quick look at the Penn State football schedule, and then we're going to take a look really at so much more, because we have, I think, more of a wider scope here on this show as well. That we're going to take a look at the rest of college football and give both of our predictions for the college football playoff. But what jumps at you about this schedule?
What jumps out to me the most is the fact that 4 of the toughest 5 games, 4 of the toughest games are at home. And those games are Ohio State, Michigan State, Iowa, Michigan, which is the away game, in Wisconsin. Those 4 out of the 5 are at home for Big Ten play. Obviously, we talked about earlier how tough the Big Ten is this year, specifically the East. Penn State has to cross over and play Wisconsin from the West, and as well as Iowa and Illinois, which obviously isn't that tough. But it's a tough schedule. But
9 p.m. Friday night kick.
on FS1. Tune in. But regardless, they have the majority of their tough games at home, which McSorley has not lost a game at home in his career thus far at Penn State, which is interesting. And that's what jumps out to me the most about the schedule. As well, I think the bye comes at a pretty good time for them. Right after either an emotional win or an emotional loss against Ohio State, you have a bye, and then you get a little redemption game against Michigan State at home. Obviously, that was a horrible game last year after the Ohio State loss, and then the rain delay in East Lansing, and they just couldn't hold on to that. They couldn't get home to Lewerke, the quarterback. He threw all over them in that miserable weather out there. But I think the schedule sets up pretty nice, and then you finish out, you go at Michigan, which is going to be a tough physical game, and then the next week at home against Wisconsin is also going to be a tough physical game, and then you kind of end with two cupcakes in Rutgers and Maryland, which is a good way to end, especially if you're going into the Big Ten championship, because they should be 2 guaranteed wins, and then you can kind of get healthy, if you will, and kind of hit your stride going into that.
Sure, and you'll take a look at the top 25. A lot of teams that Penn State will play is right here in this top 14. Michigan all the way down at 14, but that, I think, could be the toughest game of the season for Penn State up at the Big House. Michigan State, again, looks very, very good. A lot of people picking them as a team that could come out of the East because of some of the things that are going on at Ohio State, because they have really, besides Penn State, the most experienced quarterback, and because they have the most coming back, 19 starters for Michigan State. Could that be a program that, I don't know if it surprises people, but comes back into focus? I think all that's going to be very interesting, and I think Penn State has their work cut out for them. But really, I think that Penn State has an opportunity, a realistic one, to go to the college football playoff. And I'm going to give you my predictions in just a few minutes, but I think the reason is because as Tyler has been saying, Penn State has all those games at home. Penn State has, I think, the best quarterback in the Big Ten and one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And I believe that Penn State is going to be more prepared to play than Ohio State will be on September the 29th. Now, Ohio State is going to play TCU in a neutral site game. I think that can be very difficult for them. I think they're going to win that game, and of course that is a battle test that should get them ready for Penn State. But I do think that Penn State's going to beat Ohio State. I think Michigan's going to be that tough game, and I think Penn State's going to go 11-1, and winning the East will come down to a tiebreaker. Again, I'm not going to tell you what that tiebreaker will be, but my estimation is Penn State will win that tiebreaker, because if the loss comes on the road at Michigan also has some very difficult games on the road. Of course, they have to play Ohio State. Of course, they'll play Michigan State. And I'm hedging my bets that Penn State would beat the team that Michigan lost to. And, well, I guess I'm not hedging my bets if that's Penn State's only loss. And I think Michigan could either lose one more game or it could come down to some sort of tiebreaker.
I mean, looking at Michigan's schedule, their schedule could be the toughest out of all of them. They start off this week at Notre Dame.
Now, obviously, that wouldn't affect their ability to win the East.
It wouldn't affect their ability to win the East, but in the case of what we've seen the last couple of years with out-of-conference losses being 11-2, Penn State 2016 with the loss to Pitt, things like that do matter.
Yep.
And then they also go to Northwestern the same day that Penn State hosts Ohio State, and Northwestern is a very up-and-coming team. It's kind of Evanston's one of those weird places to play. You never know what you're going to get. By the way, they kick off Thursday night against Purdue, which is a great Big Ten opener.
That is a good opener.
That is a very good opener. And then they have Wisconsin still at home, Michigan. Then the next week they go to Michigan State, and then they get their bye before Penn State comes to town, and then they close out the season at Ohio State. So very tough schedule. They play all the common opponents, tough opponents, the top-ranked opponents in the Big Ten that Penn State does, but Penn State has the majority at home, where Michigan's a little mixed down the edge there. So
as we go across the Big Ten, the Ohio State Buckeyes, we mentioned that game against TCU, then at Penn State, at Michigan State, home against Michigan. And I think those games are going to be difficult. Every one of them that I just mentioned. On the road at Michigan State won't be easy. The game at Penn State won't be easy. I think Penn State, they have the opportunity to win that game. Clearly, they'll have the upper hand on Ohio State. I think Penn State can and will win that football game. So I think Ohio State will probably be, if you're asking me, a 10-2-ish team that is going to fall outside of the purview of the college football playoff, in part because I think they're going to lose some of those tiebreakers in the Big Ten East. And with those two losses, won't have an opportunity to get that 13th data point.
What a shame. It's a shame, especially for Urban Meyer. It's a total shame.
So, time for my predictions here as we get towards the end of the show. And, well, we're just going to fly them at you here. Auburn Tigers. The Tigers of Auburn. War Eagle, your national champion this year. This is an Auburn team that has possibly the toughest schedule in the country this year. They're starting off against Washington. That's this Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Tyler will be up inside the gates of Beaver Stadium trying to keep up with it on our phones. And then, of course, the gauntlet that is the SEC West with Alabama on the schedule. Of course, LSU as well. Joe Moorhead gets into the equation on October the 6th. And then, well, you have to cross over and play somebody in the East. And who do they cross over and play? None other than number 3 in the country on the road in Athens, Georgia. Toughest schedule in the country. I think they lose one of these games. Let's call it Georgia. So they beat Alabama, have the upper hand. with the head-to-head against Alabama. They go back to the title game. They beat Georgia. That's Georgia's man, I don't know. If that's their first loss of the year, I might have to go back. This is Georgia now on these predictions because it's tough to find a way to keep them out. But if all this were to play itself out, a 13-0 West Virginia Big 12 champion, a 13-0 Clemson ACC champion, a 12-1 Penn State Big 10 champion, and a 12-1 Auburn SEC champion, boy, that might be the most deserving team of all time in the Georgia Bulldogs losing in that SEC championship game that keeps them out of this potential, of course, scenario here.
Well, Auburn's schedule is incredibly tough, and that would be one reason I didn't put them into my Final Four.
I mean, this team, though, man. Jared Stidham coming back and
hey,
really strong defense, maybe the best, one of the best defenses in the country.
I mean, they can definitely play ball down there, but I mean, they could start off 1-2, and don't sleep on Moorhead either at Mississippi State. That game's on the road in Stark Vegas. Mississippi State's going to have a pretty good team. I think that it's going to be Alabama and then Auburn or Mississippi State jockeying for that second spot out in the SEC West, believe it or not.
Very interesting. All right, so those are my predictions. Clemson going 13-0, Penn State 12-1. West Virginia, Will Grier, maybe one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I still think I'd take Trace first, but here's my thought on the Big 12. You look at the rest of this conference, and I think that they really have an opportunity to go 3-0. And I think this West Virginia team is going to outscore a lot of teams. I think that this West Virginia team is going to have a little bit of a down Oklahoma, a little bit of a down Oklahoma State. I think they're going to be able to beat Texas. And then all of a sudden, a win against TCU, and you're off to the races. I know if, I get it. But a TCU team that I think shoulders a loss against Ohio State, a TCU team that lost some experience versus a West Virginia team that has a lot back and has one of the best offenses in the country. They're ranked 17 right now. I like them to go to the Final Four, the college football playoff, and be undefeated on the way there.
That is definitely an interesting pick. They are starting to pick up some steam, especially with Will Grier, David Sills, their wide receiver. But looking at their schedule, and this is another schedule that's not very easy, although you never know what you're getting in the Big 12, especially because they don't play the best defense. But week 3 at NC State, I mean, that's always a tough place to play. As of late, they're really coming around. Then they go to Iowa State in mid-October, a program that Matt Campbell has on the rise and really shocked a lot of people last year. And then I look at their last 4 games this season: at Texas, home against TCU, at Oklahoma State, home against Oklahoma. I mean, that's a very tough stretch. Not to mention, more than likely, they're going to be playing one of those teams again in the following week in the Big 12 championship.
Sure.
There's no division, so it's just 1 and 2 play each other.
Yep.
So, I mean, they would definitely, like Auburn, deserve it. I think really anybody that makes it this year is going to deserve it, but specifically the schedules of West Virginia, Auburn, and then whoever comes out of the Big 10, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, even though I don't think they're going to, or even Michigan State, they would have deserved it based on their schedule. Going off of the schedules, the easiest 2 are probably the 2 best teams in the country in Alabama and Clemson. They're 2 teams. I know you don't have Alabama in the Final Four, but I definitely do have those 2 teams because of how easy their schedules. I don't know if you have their schedules there, but they're pretty weak, and I don't know if you have that there.
Yeah, I got Clemson right here for you.
Okay.
So Furman, Texas A&M, Syracuse.
That's an interesting week 2 game at A&M.
They got nobody. I mean, they got absolutely.
But they always have that
schedule.
one game that they lose every year.
Correct. Yep.
Last year was Syracuse. The year before was Pitt. NC State gave them a game in 2016 too that came down to the wire. There's always that one game, but chances are they're going to play like Miami in the ACC championship, who also really doesn't play that many great opponents this year. But they start with LSU, who you never really know what you're getting.
Yeah.
But
and then on the Alabama side, I mean, Louisville is a decent out-of-conference game, but their schedule is fairly light.
Well, they have the Citadel right before Auburn, so you got to watch out for them.
Yeah, you do. Always a late November FCS game. You have to. You're not an SEC program if you don't do it. So, but before we get out of here, who you got? Who you got?
Well, I'm going with Alabama and Clemson as 1 and 2 because of what they've done the last couple years, what they've built on their defensive lines, their offensive lines. And also their schedules are very favorable this year. The 3 is going to be whoever comes out of the Big Ten. I haven't decided on it yet.
Man,
I don't know.
you don't think it's Michigan though, huh?
I don't think it's Michigan. I don't think it's Michigan State. I think it's going to be Penn State, Wisconsin, or Ohio State. But
interesting.
I can't figure that one out. And then number 4 is going to be Georgia. I think that they're going to have one loss at the end of the year, whether that's in the SEC championship or if that is before the SEC championship and they end up winning the SEC championship over Alabama or Auburn. I think that it would be Alabama-Georgia SEC championship, and I think that they would, if the situation is like last year, even though who was in it last year? Was it Auburn, Georgia? Right, and Alabama didn't play.
Yep.
But I do think that they will get in as the 4, and the SEC will probably get 2 teams. But it could be the Big Ten that gets the 2 teams this year too. So
could be.
I'm guessing my bold prediction is one conference gets 2 teams, and the Big 12 and the Pac-12 are left out.
Ooh, all right. There you go. It's good stuff. And then next for Penn State is a date with Appalachian State. Brian Tripp talked about a little bit, a solid team. James Franklin not giving them any disrespect as he always does. It's App State, App State, App State for the upcoming week. Tyler, it's great to have you back, my man. I'm really enjoying this, and I'm glad we're doing this again.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Hopefully the weather turns a little bit for more football weather when we get rid of the humidity, but football's in the air, and get ready because Thursday night it kicks off, Northwestern, Purdue, and then this weekend there's some pretty good games on as well, and in my opinion, it's the best sport in America.
There you go. College football is back, everybody. Appreciate you joining us here on the Nittany Lions Sports Report. For Tyler Gelhaus, I'm Bob Long saying so long. Join us every Tuesday night as we break down Nittany Lion football, preview the upcoming opponents, and, of course, bring on some of the Penn State media's best guests. We are looking forward to the ride with you. It'll be a great 2018 season, and I think this team has a lot of promise ahead. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.